The room had no windows. That was the first thing she had memorized. Not the pain, not the cold that seeped through the stone floor and climbed her spine like something alive. Not the sound of boots scraping outside the door at irregular intervals, a rhythm designed to keep her mind from settling, to make her feel like the next moment would always be worse than this one. No windows. That meant she could not track the sun. That was intentional. Deprive a person of natural light long enough and something fundamental inside them begins to loosen. Time stops being real. Yesterday and an hour ago start to feel the same. The mind reaches for anchors and finds nothing. She had been taught this. She had sat in a classroom at a naval training facility and listened to an instructor with tired eyes explain exactly how this worked. How the human brain, stripped of circadian rhythm, stripped of the basic architecture of day and night, begins to turn on itself. How isolation is not merely uncomfortable, it is a weapon. Precise, patient, effective. She had taken notes. Now she sat in the dark and used what she knew. Her name was Sloan Harmon. She was 26 years old. She weighed 118 pounds, stood 5 feet 4 inches tall, and had been sitting in this stone room for 9 days. Her wrists were bound behind her with nylon cord. Her right eye had swollen mostly shut 2 days ago when the man she thought of only as Farhan had decided that patience was taking too long. 3 of her ribs on the left side were cracked. She could feel them when she breathed a sharp complaint her body made with every inhale, and she had learned to breathe shallowly to give her lungs just enough to keep her mind clear without giving her body a reason to scream. She had not spoken since they brought her here. Not one word, not her name, not her unit, not the patrol route, not the frequency, not the FOB designation, nothing. Farhan had asked her the same questions in different orders. He had asked them softly like a man who understood her and only wanted to help. He had asked them with his face close to hers, breath warm and steady, the way a person speaks when they have all the time in the world. He had asked them after 3 hours of complete darkness, with a speaker outside the door cycling through static and high-pitched tones designed to prevent sleep. She had not answered, and now on the 9th night she sat with her back straight despite the screaming in her ribs, and she listened. Not for footsteps, not for threats. She listened to what the compound was telling her. The diesel generator on the north side of the building had a misfire cycle. Every 40 seconds it stuttered. She had counted it 10,000 times. It meant the vehicle that ran on that generator left before dawn when the engine warmed. The vehicle returned mid-afternoon. She could track time by the generator's pattern. The guard on the east corridor changed at intervals of 6 hours. She could tell the difference between the 2 men by their footsteps. One dragged his left heel slightly. The other walked with his weight forward, toes first, the way soldiers sometimes do when they have been trained to move quietly, and the habit has become permanent. There was a gap on the northeast corner of the compound. She knew this because Farhan had spoken twice near what she estimated was a northeast-facing wall, and both times his voice had carried a slight echo that suggested an open space behind it. A courtyard, maybe a gate. She filed it all away. In the darkness, with her ribs cracking at every breath and her eyes swollen and the cold sitting in her bones like something that had always been there, Sloan Harmon was building a map. She was not waiting to be rescued. She was working. That was the first thing you needed to understand about her. 3 weeks earlier, she had stepped off the back of a Chinook at Forward Operating Base Salerno with a pack that weighed half what she did and a set of orders that assigned her as the attached Navy corpsman for Recon Team 4. The loadmaster had given her a look when she climbed out. Not an unfriendly look, just the look of a man cataloging something that did not fit the expected pattern. A small woman with dark hair pulled back tight, wearing gear that fit correctly, moving without hesitation toward the tarmac. He had probably loaded dozens of units through that helicopter. He had not expected her. She was used to that. The base smelled like dust and jet fuel, and something burning in the distance that she chose not to think about. The mountains to the north were the color of old bone in the early morning light, enormous and indifferent, the kind of landscape that makes a person feel very small and very mortal at the same time. She had never been to Afghanistan before. She had seen photographs. They had not prepared her for the scale of it. She found Team 4's staging area without asking anyone for directions. She had studied the base layout on the flight in. There were 5 of them waiting. Gunny Calloway was the first one she identified, not because he introduced himself, because he was standing slightly apart from the others in the way that men who have been in charge for a long time stand even when they are at rest. He was 49 years old, built like a man who had been hard work his entire life, with a face weathered past the point where you could easily guess his age and eyes, that moved in short methodical sweeps when someone new entered his space. He looked at her the way a mechanic looks at an unfamiliar engine. Not hostile, evaluating. He said nothing. Briggs spoke first. He was 33 and built like a linebacker who had lost 15 pounds to deployment and kept all the attitude. He had the kind of face that looked permanently skeptical, like the world had been promising him things and consistently under-delivering. He looked at Sloane, looked at her pack, looked back at her face. "They sent us a girl," he said. He did not say it to her. He said it to the man standing next to him loud enough that everyone, including Sloane, could hear it clearly. It was a specific kind of statement, the kind a person makes when they want the subject to know exactly where they stand while preserving the distance of not having said it directly. Not a threat, an observation with an audience. Sloane set her pack down. She began unloading her medical kit, checking inventory in the order she always checked it. Tourniquet, pressure dressing, hemostatic agent, chest seal, decompression needle. She had done this so many times that her hands moved without instruction, efficient and quiet, and she did not look up. Calloway watched her do this. "She's a medic," he said to Briggs. "You don't die, she doesn't have to work." It was not a defense of her. It was a statement of function. She understood the difference. She appreciated it precisely because it was not a defense. She did not want anyone defending her. She wanted to do the job. Chief Drummond, who had been sitting on an equipment case and watching the whole exchange from behind sunglasses, said nothing at all. He was 46, lean in the way long-distance runners are lean, with hands that were too still for a person who was simply waiting. He had the quality of a man who had learned long ago that observation returned more than participation. He watched Sloane check her medical kit with an expression she could not read behind the sunglasses. Lance Corporal Tate was 22 and trying very hard not to look nervous. He managed it about 60% of the time. He had the kind of face that would look young for another decade, earnest and open, not yet worn into the careful blankness that the others wore. He gave Sloane a small nod when she glanced up. She returned it. The fifth man, a corporal named Decker, looked at her for 2 seconds and then looked away and did not look at her again for the rest of the day. She filed him as neutral, neither problem nor ally. That was Team 4. They would be her world for the foreseeable future. She finished checking her kit and began on the secondary pack. Calloway turned to the team without ceremony. "Patrol brief at 1400. Get some rest if you can." That was it. No introduction for her, no welcome, no orientation. She found where she was billeted, stowed her gear, and spent 20 minutes sitting on her bunk, going over the patrol routes she had memorized on the flight in. She did not expect it to be easy. She expected to prove herself, and she knew exactly how she planned to do it. The first week passed the way first weeks in a new assignment always pass. Slowly at the edges, and then all at once. There were 3 patrols, each one longer than the last, pushing into the valley terrain southeast of the base, where the mountains pressed in on either side, and the villages sat low and wary and watching. Sloane walked at the back of the formation as the attached support element, which was standard. She carried her medical kit and her issued M4 carbine, and she moved quietly and watched everything. She watched the terrain the way her father had taught her to watch terrain. Not for threats specifically, for information. The way a landscape changes tells you things. A path that shows foot traffic but no livestock says something. A field that should be cultivated but is not says something else. A dog that barks in a compound and then goes silent before the team passes as though someone quieted. It says something important enough to remember. She noted all of it. Briggs made 2 more comments in the first week. One was to Calloway, quiet enough that he thought she could not hear it, about whether the brass had run out of real medics or if they were just trying to make some kind of point. The second was directly to her on the 3rd patrol when she stopped to adjust the weight distribution in her pack. "Problem, Doc." He used the title with a specific inflection. Not respect, not hostility. Something in between, designed to remind her that her title was a function, not a rank, and that function, in his estimation, was limited. "No problem," she said. She kept walking. Chief Drummond, who had been walking 4 feet ahead of her, slowed his pace slightly so that they were walking parallel. He did not say anything. He did not look at her. He just adjusted his position so that if Briggs wanted to say something else, he would have to say it in Drummond's general direction as well. She filed that away too. It was on the morning of the 7th day that things began to change. Not dramatically. Not in the way that things change in stories with clean before and after. The way things actually change quietly and in stages that you only recognize later. They were staging for a patrol when Sloan noticed Tate. He was putting on his kit with the same focus he always brought to it, careful and methodical, but something in his coloring was off. A specific pallor that had nothing to do with the early morning cold. His movements were slightly slower than usual, the kind of slowness a person produces when they are compensating for something they do not want anyone else to see. He was blinking a fraction too often. She moved closer. "Hold on," she said. He looked at her. "I'm good." "I know," she said. "Hold on." She put the back of her hand on his forehead, temperature elevated but not dramatically. That was the deceptive part. She asked him to show her his hands. He did, confused. There was a small laceration on the web of his right thumb, a week old at most, already closed over. She looked at the skin around it. The tissue was hot and slightly raised. The redness extended in a pattern that was subtle enough to miss if you were not specifically looking for it. If you were not a 26-year-old Navy corpsman who had spent 6 months in a trauma unit learning what the early stages of systemic infection look like before they became impossible to ignore. "When did you cut this?" she said. "Week ago. It's nothing." "It's not nothing. Are you running a fever?" "Little bit. Not enough to." "Have you been sleeping?" He paused. "Some." She took his pulse, slightly elevated. She looked at his eyes, the slight glassiness that most people would attribute to fatigue or a long week. "You have an infection," she said. "Early stage. Not dangerous yet." "Yet," he repeated. "If we leave today and you spend 8 hours in the field in this condition, your body is going to stop being able to compensate. By tonight, you are looking at a fever that will put you on the ground, and in the field that becomes a different problem." She paused. "I need to treat this now, 20 minutes. He looked at Calloway. Calloway looked at Sloan. She met his eyes and held them, not challenging him, simply informing him. "This is what I see. This is what I know. This is my assessment." Calloway was quiet for 4 seconds. Then he said, 20 minutes. Briggs made a sound, not a word, the kind of exhale that communicates everything without committing to language. Sloan set up her kit and treated Tate with an economy of motion that required no commentary. She knew what she was doing. She had done it, or something like it, hundreds of times. She cleaned the wound properly, administered the appropriate antibiotic protocol, gave him instructions for monitoring over the following hours, and packed up in 18 minutes. When it was done, Tate looked at her with something new in his expression. "How did you see that?" he said. "I was looking," she said. Calloway made no comment. He simply signaled the team forward, and the patrol began. But something had shifted. She could feel it the way you can feel a change in atmospheric pressure before a storm. Not visible, not stated, simply present. Drummond fell back to walk near her for a portion of the patrol. He still said nothing. He did not need to. Briggs was quiet in a way that was different from his usual quiet. For his quiet had been the quiet of a man who had made up his mind and saw no reason to announce it again. Now his quiet was the quiet of a man who was recalculating. They are different things, and she knew the difference. She said nothing about any of it. She watched the mountains and cataloged her information and kept walking. It was 2 days after that patrol in the late afternoon, when the light over the Hindu Kush turned the color of a fire dying down, that the thing happened which Chief Drummond would think about for a long time afterward. The team was running equipment checks in the staging area. It was a routine exercise, the kind of discipline that keeps gear functional and hands familiar. Each man checking his own kit and then cross-checking with the man beside him. Clean, replace, organize. Someone had left a Remington M24 on a case near the staging table. Not Sloan's weapon, not her responsibility. It had been set there by Decker while he reorganized his pack, waiting to be moved back to the rifle rack. Sloan walked past the case carrying a box of medical supplies to the staging table. She needed both hands for the box. She set the box down, reached for the M24 to move it out of her way, and picked it up. It lasted 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, something happened that had nothing to do with thought. Her left hand found the stock before her eyes registered its position. Her right hand's index finger, extended flat against the outside of the trigger guard, was already in the correct position before she had consciously decided how to hold the weapon. Her head began to drop into a natural cheek weld muscle, finding the angle it knew. She caught herself. She set the rifle down carefully, moved it to the side, picked up the box, and continued to the staging table. Drummond had been 12 feet away. He had seen all 4 seconds of it. He was doing something with his own kit that required most of his attention, but he was Drummond, which meant that a portion of his attention was always doing what Drummond's attention always did, Mapping the room, cataloging, he had been in or around special operations long enough to know what trained muscle memory looks like. The way a person who has fired tens of thousands of rounds picks up a rifle is different from the way a person who has handled one occasionally picks up a rifle. It is not a dramatic difference. It does not announce itself. It is a matter of economy and precision of a body that has found the optimal positions through pure repetition until those positions are no longer choices. What he had just watched Sloan Harmon do with that M24 was not the action of a Navy corpsman who had gone through standard weapons qualification. He said nothing. He went back to his kit, but he thought about it for a long time. She would think later in the stone room about what she had allowed herself in those 4 seconds, whether it was carelessness, whether some part of her had wanted someone to see. She did not have a clean answer. She knew that she had carried something for a long time the way a person carries a weight so familiar they stop noticing it until the moment someone else looks at it and makes it real again. She had been 9 years old the first time her father put a rifle in her hands. They had been on a ridge above a valley in rural Colorado, just the two of them in the kind of morning quiet that belongs specifically to high altitude and early autumn when the air has that particular clarity that makes distances deceptive and everything feels close and possible. Her father was a big man in the way that some Marines are big, not built for show, built for function. He had hands that seemed designed specifically for handling difficult things, and a face that had been weathered by too many deployments in too many hard climates into something that looked less like age and more like an element of the landscape itself. He talked when he needed to and not before. He had a way of being quiet that was not distance. It was attention. He was always attending to something. The wind direction, the angle of the light, the way a branch moved or did not move on a hillside 200 yards out. He had been a scout sniper for 22 years. He had served in Desert Storm, had been in places he could not talk about in the years that followed, and had done multiple tours in Afghanistan after 2001 with the kind of quiet consistency that does not make headlines but keeps certain things from getting worse than they would otherwise be. He was Gunnery Sergeant Dale Harmon, and the Marine Corps had been in some fundamental way the language in which he understood himself. But on that ridge in Colorado, he was just her father. He showed her how to hold the rifle before he told her what it was for, how the stock goes into the pocket of the shoulder, how the cheek comes down to meet the stock, not the stock up to meet the cheek, how the non-firing hand supports but does not grip. He talked about these things the way he talked about most things, quietly and with precision, like he was reading from a manual that only he could see. Breathing, he said. She nodded. Show me. She breathed. 4 in, he said. Hold 7, out 8. She did it. Feel your heart. She nodded. There's a pause between beats. That's when you squeeze, not pull, never pull, squeeze. In that pause. How long is the pause? He was quiet for a moment. Depends on your heart rate. Your job is to make your heart rate something you can predict. She looked at him. How? We'll get there. They had gotten there. Over the 2 years that followed on that ridge and others like it, he had given her all of it. Wind reading, elevation adjustment, the way heat shimmer affects a shot over distance, the Coriolis effect, which she had thought was a joke the first time he mentioned it until he proved it was not. How to call a miss before the round arrives because the math was off and you already knew it. How to be wrong cleanly and correct without frustration. The last morning on the ridge had been in the autumn before he left for his final tour. He had looked at her for a long moment at the end of the session and said nothing, which she understood now was a kind of goodbye she had not recognized as one. And then on a morning in August of 2009, in the Kunar province of Afghanistan, a province that looked in the photographs she later found not entirely unlike the Colorado landscape where he had taught her Gunnery Sergeant Dale Harmon did not come home. She was 11 years old. She did not fully understand it for another year. Not the fact of it. The fact was simple and blunt and arrived like something physical, a blow that does not hurt immediately because the body is still trying to understand what happened. No. She did not fully understand what it meant for her life. The permanent absence of the specific person who had made the world legible to her. The person who had known how to translate silence into information and distance into something manageable and patience into a kind of strength. She had made a promise to her mother. She had not articulated it as a promise at the time. She had articulated it as a decision in the way that children articulate decisions when they are trying to construct order from grief. She would not touch a rifle again. The thing her father had given her, and the thing that had in some chain of causation too long and complicated for an 11-year-old to follow, taken him from her. She would put it away. She put it away. She put it away and she kept it away for 15 years while she finished school and went to nursing clinicals and signed her enlistment papers and went through corpsman training and proved herself in a trauma unit where the work was concrete and the results were immediate and the thing you were doing was never ambiguous. You were either helping someone live or you were not. That was the job. She was exceptional at it. She had not picked up a rifle in 15 years. Until 4 seconds in a staging area revealed that the body does not forget what it has been taught with enough repetition regardless of what the mind has decided about it. Drummond had seen it. She told herself it did not matter. She was not entirely sure that was true. The patrol that changed everything launched at 0300 on a morning that was cold enough to make the breath visible and dark enough that the mountains were only a deeper darkness against the sky. The objective was straightforward as objectives go. A route reconnaissance through a section of Kunar Valley that had seen increased foot traffic in the previous week. Not a raid, not a direct action mission. Eyes on terrain intelligence collection, a specific set of grid coordinates to verify. They expected to be back by noon. Calloway gave the brief with the economy of a man who had given hundreds of briefings and knew that the most dangerous thing you could put in an operation order was unnecessary words. Routes, contingencies, comm plan, rally points, abort criteria. He went through it methodically without theater, and the team absorbed it in the way that trained people absorb information, not passively but actively filing each element against the operational picture in their heads. Sloan listened and mapped it against what she already knew. They moved out in good order. The terrain in that part of Kunar is relentlessly vertical, a geography that punishes the unprepared and merely inconveniences the experienced. Steep-sided valleys with rock walls that shade the floor until well past sunrise, dry creek beds that become channels during rain, and obstacles at any time, terraced hillsides built by generations of farmers who had made their peace with the mountain on the mountain's terms. She walked in her position and breathed the cold air and watched. For the first 3 hours there was nothing, the kind of nothing that is itself a form of information. No movement where movement was expected. No digs. One village they passed at a distance showed no lights in the windows at an hour when lights were normal. She filed it. Calloway had seen it too. She watched his head orientation shift fractionally as they passed the village. He was cataloging it the same way she was. Tate was walking well this morning. Whatever the infection had been reaching for the treatment had turned it back. He had more color than he had in days, and his movement had the quality of a body that felt like its own again. The ambush came from 3 directions simultaneously. That was the thing that made it not an accident and not an opportunistic attack. 3 directions simultaneously requires coordination. It requires communication and timing. It requires that someone know where a patrol will be at approximately what time and that they have assets positioned accordingly. The first shots came from the ridge to the north high ground, less than 300 meters, and they were aimed. Not the suppressive fire of fighters who want to pin a position. Aimed fire, which means someone on that ridge had a specific target or targets in mind. The second element opened up from the east, simultaneously automatic weapons from behind the low stone walls of an abandoned agricultural terrace. The third element, smaller, was to the south. The geometry of it was not accidental. Calloway's voice came over the radio, immediately controlled and immediate, already solving the problem. He called the contact, identified the positions, assigned the team to fighting positions. There was no panic in his voice. There was the focused machinery of a man who had been in bad places before and had learned to think faster under pressure rather than slower. The team went to ground and to cover with the speed of people whose training has become instinct. Sloan went to ground and assessed the situation in the same motion. She was at the rear of the formation when the contact started. The nearest cover was a boulder 6 feet to her right. She reached it and oriented herself to the threat environment. Calloway and Drummond were 20 meters to the north. Briggs was to the east, engaged. Decker was somewhere she could not immediately see. She could see Tate. He was 12 meters from her position behind a low rock formation, and he had been hit. Not a clean miss. He was still moving, still in the fight, still oriented toward the threat, but he was moving differently than he had been moving 2 minutes ago. The kind of moving that means something has changed in the machinery. She did not debate it. She moved. 12 meters under fire, staying low, using the terrain the way she had been taught to use terrain before the Marine Corps had given her a more formal vocabulary for it. Move between the pockets of cover. Do not silhouette against the skyline. Use the slope. She reached Tate. He had been hit in the left shoulder. Not the worst place to be hit, and not the best. The round had entered from a high angle consistent with fire from the northern ridge and exited in a way that told her immediately what the vascular situation was and what it was not. He was losing blood at a rate that was manageable for the next 5 minutes, and not after that. "I've got you," she said. He was still firing over the rock with his right arm, which told her something about the kind of young man he was. "I'm fine," he said. "You're not fine," she said. "Keep firing." She worked while he fired, pressure dressing. The specific technique for a shoulder wound that is losing blood but has not compromised the subclavian. Her hands moved without discussion, doing what they knew how to do, and she used her body to shield her work from the incoming rounds that were impacting the rocks around them with a regularity she had decided to treat as background noise, because the alternative was to stop working, and stopping was not acceptable. "Can you move?" she said. "Yeah. We need to move north. I'll tell Calloway." She keyed her mighty and gave Calloway the assessment. His response came back in 4 words. He had already identified the exfil route. The team was consolidating. "Go," she said to Tate. He went. She went. She did not know in that moment that the southern element of the ambush had swung wide, that it had been positioned not to engage the team directly, but to cut off the rear of the formation once the team began moving. She did not know this because she had been focused on Tate, which was the correct thing to be focused on, and because the geometry of the ambush had been designed specifically to create exactly this situation. She got Tate moving north. She turned south. 3 men, less than 50 meters, moving toward her position with the purposeful pace of men who are not hunting randomly. They are hunting specifically. She understood in that moment with a clarity that felt almost calm that they had not come for the team in general. They had come for the medic. Take out the medic, and what you leave behind is a combat team without medical support in a hostile environment, which changes every subsequent casualty from a recoverable situation to a terminal one. A medic is a force multiplier. Remove the multiplier and you change the equation. She ran the calculation in the 2 seconds she had. The team was already moving north. Tate was moving north with them. Going north meant the 3 men followed her and potentially caught the team's flank during their consolidation, which was the worst possible moment to pick up a tail. She did not go north. She stopped and oriented toward the south. They were faster than she had calculated. The ground hit her from the left. Not a shot, a tackle. A large man moving fast from a position she had not seen low against the terrain, using the fold in the ground she had not had time to account for. She went down hard and the M4 was no longer in her hands. She fought. She fought the way someone fights when they have something to protect and nothing to lose, with the specific ferocity of a small person who has no good options and chooses the worst possible one for the people trying to subdue her. She got an elbow into something that gave a satisfying crack. She got her legs under one of them for long enough to make it costly. It was not enough. They were bigger and there were more of them, and eventually weight and numbers are a form of mathematics that does not respond to will. She heard Calloway's voice on the radio very briefly, calling her position. She heard the team's engagement to the north, the sound of it shifting as the contact evolved. Then they had her hands behind her, and she could not key the radio. She did not say anything. Not her name, not her unit, not a word. She let them pull her up. She let them move her south towards a vehicle she could hear but not yet see. And as they moved her, she began to count. 23 steps from where she had been taken to the vehicle. The vehicle was oriented southwest. The engine had a specific sound, a diesel 4-cylinder with a damaged exhaust mount. She would recognize that sound again. Movement direction southwest. The sun was behind the mountains to the east and beginning to lighten the sky. Southwest meant moving away from the FOB, deeper into terrain that was more difficult to surveil toward the border region, where the mountains get bigger and the valleys get narrower, and the roads such as they are become suggestions. The vehicle smelled like diesel fuel and canvas, and something chemical she identified as a common cleaning agent. They put a hood over her head. She noted the weave of the fabric, loose enough to breathe comfortably. The air getting through had a quality that told her they were still moving through open terrain, not enclosed spaces. She began to construct the map. She counted turns. She noted changes in road quality and what they suggested about the terrain they were traversing. She estimated time. She did not speak. She did not make a sound. The first rule her father had ever given her before the rifle, before the breathing, before everything else. "Listen first," he had said on a ridge above a Colorado valley in a morning that smelled like pine and cold altitude. "Always listen first. You can't hear anything if you're talking." She had listened. She was listening now. When the vehicle stopped and they walked her into the building, she counted her steps. 23 from the vehicle to the first door. A change in sound quality that told her the first space was larger than a corridor. Stone floors. A staircase going down 7 steps. Another door. Then the stone room. No windows. They took the hood off. She looked at the room for 30 seconds, cataloging every detail. Then she settled her back against the wall and began to construct the map in her head. She was 26 years old. Her name was Sloan Harmon. Her father had been a Marine Scout sniper who had given her everything he knew about patience and observation and the kind of discipline that does not announce itself. She intended to use every day she had. The compound breathed. That was how she had come to think of it by the 9th day. Not a building, not a prison, a living thing with a rhythm she had learned the way you learn the breathing of someone sleeping next to you, without trying, by proximity and attention and the slow accumulation of pattern. The generator on the north wall stuttered every 40 seconds. The guard with the dragging left heel came on at what her body told her was early evening and stayed until what felt like midnight. The other guard, the one who walked toe first, took the second half of the night. There was a third man she had identified only by the sound of his cough, a deep rattling in the left lung that suggested chronic infection or old damage, who appeared irregularly at the east wall and spoke to no one. The vehicle left before dawn. She had confirmed this 11 times. On the 9th morning, it had not left. She registered this the way she registered everything, without expression, without rushing to conclusion. A change in pattern is information. Information requires evaluation before response. She sat with it and thought about what the vehicle's continued presence might mean and filed it alongside everything else she had built in the 9 days since they had brought her here. The room was 12 feet by 9 feet approximately. She had measured it by counting her own footsteps on the first morning before they decided that allowing her to stand was a courtesy they were no longer interested in extending. The ceiling was low. The walls were irregular stone mortared, but not finished, the kind of construction built quickly by people who needed function and not form. There was a single iron bolt in the north wall at approximately shoulder height when standing. It had no practical application to her situation, but she cataloged it anyway. The floor was cold enough in the early hours that it pulled heat through her clothing in a way she could feel as a measurable loss. She managed this by sitting against the east wall, which absorbed marginally more of the day's warmth than the others, and by moving her fingers regularly to maintain circulation. They had bound her wrist behind her on the first day with nylon cord, and she had, over the following 9 days, worked the binding through a range of micro-movements designed to prevent the kind of nerve and tissue damage that would compromise her hands when she needed them. She would need them. She did not know when. She knew with certainty. Farhan had come in on the morning of the 8th day and said nothing at all. He had stood in the doorway for what she estimated was 4 minutes watching her, and she had looked at a fixed point on the opposite wall and breathed at the rate she had decided was optimal and given him nothing to work with. On the 7th day, he had been patient. On the 6th, he had been methodical. On the 5th, he had been quietly intense in the way of a man who believes he is close to something. On the 8th day, he had simply stood there. She had thought about what that meant. A trained interrogator who stops asking questions is not giving up. A trained interrogator who stops asking questions is changing the calculation. He is deciding that the direct approach has reached its limit and that something else is needed. Something else in her training and in the weeks of preparation that had preceded this assignment was usually one of 2 things. The first was escalation, a change in the nature of the pressure being applied, an introduction of new variables. There had been a second man on the 6th day heard through the wall, an American voice, flat vowels, mid-Atlantic quality, speaking to Farhan in English with the fluency of a native. His words had been brief but specific. The timeline was 8 days, and someone needed to act before it closed. The second option was waiting. Let the isolation do its work. Let the absence of sound and light and time erode the architecture of resistance from the inside. She was not those people. She was the daughter of Dale Harmon, and he had spent 2 years teaching her that patience is not a passive thing. Patience is the decision to remain at your post regardless of the conditions, internal or external, and to continue doing the work. She was doing the work. She had been doing the work since the first hour. On the 7th day, when the afternoon light had pushed through a gap in the doorframe and given her a brief window of illumination, she had been looking at the floor near the chair and noticed something, a piece of metal, thin and flat, perhaps 2 centimeters long, fallen from somewhere, a fastener of some kind. She had worked it to her fingers over the following hour using the contact between the floor and the backs of her bound hands, a process that required patience she had and time she had more of than she wanted. She had kept it cupped in the fingers of her right hand since then. It was not a key. It was not a weapon. It was a tool. The chair they put her in during interrogation had a wooden back. The wood was old and rough-grained. She had been sitting in that chair for 9 days, and for 2 of those days, while Farhan watched her face and her body and waited for the crack to appear, she had been using the small piece of metal to inscribe with the careful economy of someone working in a medium that allowed no error, a record on the inner back surface of the chair. Not words, not letters in any standard sense. A series of marks that would mean nothing to anyone who did not know how to read them. Guard positions, timing, the northeast gap, the vehicle pattern, the compound dimensions as best she had estimated them, the number of personnel she had identified by sound and movement. And one other thing, a sequence that represented the pattern she had constructed from Farhan's conversations and the American voice on the 6th day. The piece she was most certain of, the piece that in the hands of the right person would point an investigation toward the right target. She had done this with her hands bound behind her, working by feel, using a piece of metal smaller than a thumbnail over 2 days of intermittent sessions, while simultaneously giving Farhan's observation everything he expected to see. Her father had not called it technique. He had called it staying at the work. He had set it on the ridge when she was 10 years old, lying in a shooting position for 3 hours, and her left hip was past complaint and into genuine pain. She had not moved. She had stayed. The feeling is real, he told her afterward. The feeling is just not the point. She held that in the stone room for 9 days. On the 9th night, with the vehicle still in the compound and Farhan's 8th-day timeline pressing against her awareness like something with weight, she was sitting with her back against the east wall when she heard it. She heard it before she could identify it. A vibration more than a sound, something that entered the body through bone before the ears caught up. She held absolutely still and focused everything she had. A rotary wing aircraft, at low altitude, moving in a pattern that was inconsistent with transit, not going somewhere, orbiting. She knew the sound of helicopters. She had grown up knowing it the way she had grown up knowing the sound of wind in a rifle barrel and the way stone feels different from soil under a shooting position. Her father had taken her to air shows at Peterson Air Force Base when she was small, and she had made him tell her the name of every aircraft and what it was for, and he had, with the patience of a man who took his child's questions seriously. This was not a transport helicopter. This was not a cargo run. The specific quality of the sound, the rotor frequency, the altitude, and the pattern was consistent with a rotary wing asset conducting a low-signature reconnaissance orbit. The kind of pattern associated with direct action preparation. The controlled, methodical approach of a unit that has done this before and intends to do it well. She sat absolutely still and listened to the sky. For the first time in 9 days, something moved across her face that was not entirely controlled. Not relief, not quite. Something more complicated than relief. The expression of someone who has been running a very long calculation and has just watched one of the variables resolve exactly as she needed it to. She thought about the northeast corner of the compound. She thought about the guard change timing. She thought about the 23 steps from the vehicle to the first door and the 7 steps down and the stone floor and the absence of windows. She thought about what she knew and what she was about to be able to tell someone. Her hands were still bound. Her ribs still pressed their complaint into every breath. The sound of the helicopter moved through its orbit above the mountains and then went quiet in the way of a system going dark before it activates. Sloan Harmon sat up a little straighter, which cost her something, but she paid it without hesitation. She was ready. The compound breathed. Farhan came in on the morning of the 2nd day and spoke to her quietly about her father. He had the name, he had the unit designation. He spoke about Dale Harmon with a familiarity designed to unsettle her, to make her feel that the private things she carried were not private, that everything she thought was hers had already been taken. She listened to all of it, not because it was comfortable. The mention of her father's name in this place from this person sent something through her chest that was physical in its intensity. But she recognized what he was doing. She had studied this exact technique. Establish false intimacy. Create the sense that secrets have already been lost. Lower the perceived cost of disclosure. She recognized it. She did not respond to it. But she listened because he was telling her something important without knowing he was telling her something important. He had access to classified information. That information had come from somewhere. The most likely somewhere was not an enemy intelligence service with independent collection capabilities. The most likely somewhere was closer. An insider. Someone with access to personnel files and operational records and the kind of background information that does not appear in open sources. She filed it. On the fourth day, he switched to sleep deprivation. She had been through a version of this in SERE training. The training version is managed. There is a limit. The instructors know where the line is and they stay behind it. Here, there was no instructor, no limit, no managed environment. She used the techniques she had been taught and some she had developed herself. Microsleep where possible. Controlled breathing to manage stress hormone levels. Dissociation, which sounds simple and is not, which is the discipline of separating the part of your mind that is suffering from the part of your mind that is working and keeping the working part operational. Her father had not called it dissociation. He had called it staying at the work. He had demonstrated it by example lying still on a ridge through 3 hours of cold that made her own bones ache. His breathing unchanged. His focus undivided, his body simply a platform for the work he was doing with his eyes and his mind. On the sixth day, Farhan came in with someone she had not seen before. He did not introduce this person. He positioned them near the door and spoke to Sloane as though the other person was not there, which was itself a form of pressure, a reminder that her situation could always expand to include new variables. She listened to the way the two men breathed when they spoke to each other briefly. Farhan's breathing was controlled in the way of a trained professional. The other man's breathing was elevated, not frightened, elevated in the way of a person who is invested in an outcome. The second man spoke only once, in English, American English, flat vowels, a specific regional quality she placed in the mid-Atlantic corridor. He did not address her. He said it to Farhan in the brief overlap between when she was returned to the room and when the door closed. We need the patrol routes. The new rotation starts in 8 days. Farhan said something she did not fully catch. The second man said, then we need to use the alternative. The door closed. She sat in the dark and held what she had just heard. The new rotation starts in 8 days. Someone knew the patrol rotation schedule. That schedule was classified at a level that meant only a small number of people within the FOB structure could access it. Someone within that structure was feeding it out. She was not only collecting information about the compound, she was collecting information about a breach inside her own house. She sat with that for a long time. On the 8th day, she began to hear the generators misfire clearly enough to time it with reasonable confidence. The vehicle left before what her body's rhythm told her was pre-dawn. It returned in what felt like mid-afternoon. She had mapped the guard changes with enough confidence to place the northeast gap at roughly 30 minutes during the early evening watch change. She had from the floor of a stone room with her hands bound and 3 cracked ribs and one eye mostly closed, built a working tactical picture of the compound she was being held in. She thought about what her father would have said. She thought he would have said, the gift is not the rifle. The gift is what you become through the discipline of learning to use it. She had not understood that when he said it. She was beginning to understand it now. On the 9th night, she heard the helicopter, and she was ready. They came at 2:17 in the morning. She knew the time only approximately by the quality of the cold and the position of the guard rotation and the count she had been running in her head since the helicopter's last orbit went quiet. She was awake. She had been awake in a specific way for the last 2 hours, the way a person is awake when they are waiting for a specific thing rather than simply enduring the absence of other things. Her attention was outward rather than inward. She heard the northeast corner first, not a sound. The absence of a sound that had been present. The guard with the dragging left heel had a specific relationship with the northeast corner that she had mapped. When he passed it, there was a brief sequence, the drag a pause, where his footfall changed quality as he turned, then the drag resuming on the new heading. She had heard this transition 40 or 50 times. At 2:17 in the morning, the transition did not complete. The drag stopped. The pause extended, and then there was no footfall at all. She did not move. She kept her breathing steady and her body positioned exactly as it had been, and she listened. The door at the top of the staircase. She heard it because she knew it was there, and she knew what it sounded like when it moved. A minimal sound. The kind of sound a door makes when it is opened by someone who knows how to open doors quietly. She counted the steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The staircase, then the second door. It opened and the silhouette that filled it was large and wore equipment and moved with the controlled economical flow of a person who has done this many times in many dark rooms. There was something in the way it stopped when the light from the helmet-mounted device found her that was not tactical. It was human. The small hesitation of a person who has been prepared for one thing and found another. She knew what she looked like. She sat straight anyway. A second figure entered behind the first and moved to the wall to the left with professional precision, establishing a position that covered the doorway. The first figure moved toward her, and she could see now that it was a man, large, moving with the medic's specific attentiveness to the person in the chair, scanning her in the way trained medical personnel scan, looking for the immediate threats before anything else. He crouched in front of her. His voice was quiet and controlled and carried the particular timbre of someone who has learned to keep their voice steady in situations where steadiness is not the natural response. "Ma'am, we're here to get you out. Can you talk to me?" She had not spoken in 9 days. Her throat was dry in a way that had become its own condition. Her voice, when it came, was rough and reduced, like something that had been left out too long. But it was level. "4 guards," she said. "One is down at the northeast corner. That's your entry point, and you already know it. 2 more on the upper level east and west corridors. Irregular east wall chronic cough. He may not be a factor tonight. He hasn't been consistent." The man in front of her was quiet for exactly 1 second. "The northeast corner," he said. "That's how we came in." "I know," she said. "The gap runs approximately 30 minutes on the evening watch change. You timed it correctly." He looked at her in the way people look at things that have not matched their expectation. "Who are you?" he said. "Sloan Harmon, Navy Corpsman, Recon Team 4 FOB Salerno." She paused. "And there is something you need to know before we leave this building. The patrol ambush that put me here was not random. Someone inside Salerno provided the coordinates. The same person has access to the rotation schedule and the timeline on the new patrol assignments. I have information about who it is. We need to move it carefully." He was quiet. "How long have you been here?" 9 days. The way he said it back was not a question. It was the sound of a person absorbing something and filing it into a specific category of things they will think about later. His name was Chambers. He said it while he worked the nylon cord from her wrist with a tool he had ready. She took the sensation of her hands coming free the way she had been preparing to take it, with the knowledge that it would hurt and the decision that the hurt was not the point. She flexed her fingers, slowly beginning the inventory of what her hands were capable of. "Any injuries I need to know about," he said. 3 cracked ribs left side. Vision in the right eye is compromised approximately 60%. I've been managing both. I can move." He looked at her in the way that medics look at patients who are telling them they are fine when the visual evidence says something more complicated. She recognized it because she had given that look herself. "We move on your word," she said. "I'm ready." Something shifted in his face. Not dramatically. A small thing, the adjustment a person makes when they have revised their assessment. "Move," he said. She stood, her legs held. She had been standing twice daily against the wall when the guard pattern allowed precisely so that they would hold when she needed them to. She walked to the door. In the doorway, she stopped. The chair was behind her. She turned to the second figure, the one by the door. Petty Officer Novak, 30 years old, who had moved with the confident economy of someone whose hands have been in enough field medical situations that they know what to do before the mind issues the instruction. "The chair," she said. "The wooden one. The back surface, someone needs to collect it." He looked at her. "It's not furniture," she said. He nodded once and spoke into his radio. She walked out of the room. The staircase was 7 steps and she counted them on the way up out of habit, and because counting was still even now a form of control. The upper level was a narrow stone corridor with 2 of the team positioned at either end. One of them glanced at her as she passed. Nothing in the glance was readable, which was itself a form of professionalism she recognized. The northeast corner of the compound was open sky. She walked through it, and the cold hit her like something physical. And for a moment, standing in the open air, for the first time in 9 days, she allowed herself 2 full seconds that were not tactical. The stars above the Hindu Kush at 2 in the morning are a specific thing. They are too many and too clear, and they have the quality of something that has always been there and will always be there, regardless of what happens in the valleys below. 2 seconds. She filed it and kept moving. The aircraft was a modified Black Hawk sitting in a depression beyond the compound's eastern wall, where the terrain dropped into a fold that put it below the sight line from the road. The crew were already at operational tempo. The rotors were turning at the careful, low-speed rate of a crew ready to increase to takeoff power on a moment's notice. Chambers guided her toward the aircraft with a hand that touched her elbow, without gripping it, the gesture of someone offering support without assuming it is needed. She noted this. It was the kind of thing you only do if you have been around people in difficult situations long enough to know the difference between helping and condescending. She climbed in. Chambers settled across from her as the aircraft lifted. In the noise of the rotors and the cold air moving through the open doors, he had the look of a man doing two things simultaneously, managing the operational reality of the exfil and managing something more internal that he was keeping to himself. She had seen that expression before, on the faces of people who are holding something they have decided is not yet the right moment to say. She let it be and began assessing her own condition with the methodical inventory she applied to everything. The ribs were the primary concern. The compromised vision would resolve with time, the swelling already reducing. Dehydration was manageable. Her hands were working, circulation returning steadily. She was functional. She was going to be functional. She was still running this inventory when Novak made a sound that she recognized immediately. Not a word, not a radio call, the specific involuntary sound of a medical professional who has identified something they were not prepared for. Chambers was moving before she had fully processed it. She was moving too. Novak had taken a round in the left thigh, entered from below and to the left, consistent with ground fire from a position below the aircraft's flight path. High on the inner thigh, the trajectory told her everything she needed to know about the vascular situation and how much time they had. Chambers had the tourniquet out. He got it positioned and began applying tension, and he was already talking to Novak in the calm and constant voice that is part of the technique, keeping the patient's consciousness engaged, giving his mind something to focus on that is not the feeling in his leg. She was 3 seconds into positioning on Novak's opposite side when she identified the secondary wound. Left thoracic region, 7th intercostal space entry, and exit confirmed. Tension pneumothorax was building. She could see it in the way Novak's breathing was beginning to change. She had a chest seal out before she consciously decided to reach for it. Left lung, she said. Entry at the 7th intercostal. I have exit confirmed. Seal going on now. Chambers did not pause in his work. Tourniquet is holding. She applied the seal with the speed and precision that comes from having done this, or something like it, enough times that the hands know the answer before the mind has finished asking the question. She checked the placement, confirmed the flutter valve was functioning, monitored Novak's respiration for the next 30 seconds. It was improving. She held position and watched. Chambers looked at her across Novak's body. She was not looking at him. She was looking at Novak. But she was aware of the look the way you are aware of things in your peripheral field, present and noted and filed. Novak was conscious, breathing, stable in the specific fragile sense that means not getting worse at this exact moment. The aircraft banked south and the mountains fell away behind it, and the sky ahead held the first suggestion of something that was not quite dawn, but was the world preparing for one. She sat back and let Chambers do the continued monitoring. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep. She thought about the chair and the marks on its inner surface and what they would tell the right people when the right people found them. She thought about the American voice on the 6th day. She thought about 8 days in a rotation schedule and the specific weight of information that someone inside Salerno had been selling. She was going to have to move fast once they landed. She was going to be ready to do that too. FOB Salerno looked different to her. Not physically. The base was the same arrangement of structures and walls and equipment that it had been 3 weeks ago when she had stepped off the Chinook. But a place looks different when you have been away from it in a specific way, when you have spent 9 days thinking about it as a point on a map rather than a location you inhabit. It acquires a quality it does not have when it is simply where you live. She walked off the aircraft and the base smelled like dust and fuel and the cooking from the DFAC that started before sunrise, and she breathed it deliberately because after 9 days of stone and diesel, it was something she wanted to register. Tate was at the edge of the landing zone. She had not expected that. She had expected the medical team, which was there in the intel debrief protocol, which she could see in the configuration of the personnel waiting. She had not expected Tate standing at the edge of the group with his arm in a sling, his face carrying an expression she had no clean category for. She walked toward the medical team. As she passed him, Tate said her name. She stopped. "You left me out first," he said. "You were mobile," she said. "It was the right call. You stayed behind so I could go." She looked at him. "That's how it works." He did not have an answer for that. He looked at her arm sling and her swollen eye and the way she was standing, and something moved across his young face that was not anything she needed to address right now. "I'm glad you're back," he said. "Me too," she said. She kept walking. The medical assessment was efficient. The doctor on duty was competent and moved through the protocol without unnecessary commentary, which she appreciated. Cracked ribs confirmed 3 left side. Vision already improving. Dehydration moderate. She was cleared for rest and debrief with a follow-up assessment in 24 hours. Calloway found her during the assessment. He stood in the doorway of the medical tent and watched the doctor work for a moment and then came in when the doctor stepped away. He looked at her. She looked at him. Something passed between them that was not quite acknowledgement and was not quite apology and was not quite respect. It was some compound of all three that did not have a clean name, but that both of them understood completely. The chair, she said. Did they get it? On its way to the intel shop, he said. Chambers called it in from the aircraft. There's a sequence on the back surface. It's encoded but not deeply. Anyone with signals intelligence background can read it. It identifies a pattern of access timing that correlates to 3 of the ambushes in the last 4 months. I can't give you a name from it, but I can give you what I have and let someone work the rest. Calloway was quiet for a moment. 4 ambushes, he said, not 3. She absorbed this. Rodriguez. She had heard the name before she deployed. Another patrol, another valley, another set of coordinates that should have been secure. Then it's active, she said. Still active. Yes, she breathed left side, registering its familiar objection. Who at Salerno has access to the patrol rotation schedule, current rotation and forward planning? 5 people, he said. Maybe 6 if you count the CO's clerk. It's not the clerk, she said. The person I'm looking at has operational authority, not administrative access. They're not reading the schedule, they're approving it. Calloway's face did not change, but something behind it did. That narrows it, he said. To 2 or 3, she said. The timing on the information release cross-referenced with the patrol approval chain should narrow it to 1. She had constructed this on the 7th and 8th days in the stone room when she had enough information and enough mental space to begin running the analysis. It was not complete. It needed access to operational records to flesh out, but it was further along than anyone outside that stone room would expect it to be. Calloway looked at her for a long moment. You built this in there, he said. There was time, she said. He almost said something. She could see him select against it. He nodded once the way Calloway nodded when he had decided something was accurate and needed no further comment. I'll get it to the right people, he said. People outside the chain here. Good, she said. And Calloway. He stopped. The chair. Make sure whoever reads it understands that the encoding is positional. The marks don't have independent meaning. They're reference to the compound layout I laid out first. Read it in sequence or it won't make sense. He nodded again and left. She lay back on the medical cot and looked at the ceiling of the tent, which was canvas, and let through a diffused gray light that was the early morning sun before it had committed to being a full sun. She thought about Novak. She thought about whether she had gotten the chest seal positioned correctly given the movement of the aircraft and the angle she had been working from. She reviewed it. She believed she had. She would check on him in the morning. She thought about Chambers. He had not said anything further after the aircraft landed. He had been in the cluster of activity around Novak as the medical team took over, and she had been directed toward her own assessment. In the organized activity of a base responding to a returned personnel asset and a wounded operator, simultaneously they had not spoken again. But he had looked at her once across the landing zone in the moment before the medical team blocked her sightline. The look had contained something specific, something she would have to turn over in her mind when she had the space to do it properly. She was still thinking when the exhaustion found the gap in her attention and took her. For the first time in 9 days, she was gone before she could finish the thought. The debrief happened at 1100. They brought her to a secure room on the administrative side of the base that had the sparse utilitarian quality of a space used for things that required documentation. A rectangular table, 4 chairs, a recording device, a civilian in civilian clothing who had the particular bearing of someone who works for an organization that does not put its name on buildings. Calloway was there. Drummond was there. The civilian. She sat down and talked for 2 hours and 40 minutes. She told them everything she had observed, every timing sequence, every guard rotation, the vehicle's departure and return pattern, the compound's dimensions and layout, and the positions of every element she had been able to identify. The 2 interrogators, their methods and characteristics, the specific sequence of escalation. She told them about the American voice on the 6th day. She told them about the patrol rotation. The 8-day timeline, the language that indicated the speaker had prior knowledge of classified scheduling information at a level of specificity that precluded general intelligence collection and indicated a human source with direct access. She told them about the chair. The civilian listened to all of it with an attentiveness she recognized as professional. He asked 3 questions over the course of the entire session. Each was precise and went directly to the gap in what she had said, which told her he had been following it carefully enough to identify the gaps. She answered all 3. When it was done, he sat back. "The information you collected in 9 days of captivity," he said, "under interrogative pressure and physical stress, while bound and with limited light and no communication matches, and in several respects exceeds what a full intelligence collection effort produced externally during the same period." She said nothing. "The chair," he said, "the marks on the chair, the compound layout encoded in positional sequence. Where did you learn to do that?" She thought about the right answer. "I adapted something I knew," she said. "From your training, from what my father taught me," she said. "He taught me that information is the only thing worth more than a life, that if you can get it out, you get it out any way you can." The civilian was quiet. Calloway was looking at the table. Drummond, who had said nothing for 2 hours and 40 minutes, looked at her from across the table with an expression she could read more clearly now than she could 3 weeks ago. He had seen her pick up the M24. He had said nothing about it. He had positioned himself between her and Briggs's commentary in the first week. He had been watching her since before she knew she was being watched. She made a note of it. Outside the secure room, the base was moving through its midday rhythm. On the medical side, Novak was in post-operative recovery. The chest wound addressed the femoral injury managed. She would check on him after this. And somewhere in the base, in the normal operations of a forward operating base, conducting its business, a person with access to classified patrol routing schedules was going about their day. The debrief ended. She walked out into the midday sun of Phoebe Salerno. She passed Drummond on the way to the medical tent. He fell into step beside her. He did not say anything for 30 meters, which was very like him. Then he said, "You saw the northeast corner from inside the room." "I estimated it," she said, "from the echo pattern in Farhan's voice near that wall." He was quiet for another few meters. "Your father was a scout sniper," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said. "He teach you to listen." She thought about a ridge above a valley, the specific quality of early autumn morning at altitude, a man who talked when he needed to and not before. "He taught me that you can't hear anything if you're talking," she said. Drummond was quiet for the rest of the walk to the medical tent. When she reached the entrance and stopped, he stopped too, and she turned and he was looking at her with an expression she could read completely now. He had known from the staging area. He had known from the 4 seconds with the M24. He had said nothing because he understood that it was not his to say, that whatever she was carrying and whatever she had decided about it belonged to her until she decided otherwise. "Novak's going to be all right," he said. "Heard from the surgeon 20 minutes ago." She exhaled slowly. "Good," she said. She turned and went inside. The arrest happened at 1400. She was not present for it. She was checking on Novak in the medical tent when Calloway's people moved on Sergeant First Class Whitmore, and she knew about it the way you know about things on a military base through the specific quality of movement that a base acquires when something significant is happening. Not alarm exactly, a change in tempo. Certain people moving with more purpose than the midday hour would normally generate, and certain other people going very still. She stayed with Novak. He was awake, sitting up with the careful posture of a man who had been told specifically not to do that and had decided the instruction applied to someone else. His color was better than it had any right to be. The surgeon had told her when she asked that the chest seal had been placed correctly, precisely correctly, in conditions that the surgeon described with the understated specificity of a person who knows what field medicine done right looks like and what it looks like when it is not. She had said nothing to that. Novak looked at her when she came in. "Harmon," he said, "how's the breathing? Manageable?" He paused. "I remember your hands." "Don't read too much into it," she said. "Triage is triage." He looked at her for a moment. "The femoral and the chest at the same time in the back of a moving aircraft 9 days after they let you out of a hole. That's not triage. That's something else." "It's training," she said, "and it worked. That's what matters." He accepted this in the way that people accept things from someone who is clearly not going to give them more. He leaned back. "Chambers is looking for you," he said. She filed it. "Rest," she said. "Don't sit up." She walked out of the medical tent, and into the afternoon, which had turned into the kind of afternoon that Afghanistan sometimes produces without warning, clear and cold, and carrying a wind off the northern mountains that had substance to it, a weight you could feel against your face. She was thinking about Whitmore. She had not met him. She had built his shape from fragments, from the patterns she had inscribed on the back of the chair, from what Calloway had told her, from the sequential logic of who had access to what and when. She knew the outline of him, the function he had served, the specific quality of betrayal that involves selling the location of people who trust the integrity of the system you are operating inside. 7 soldiers. She thought about 7 in the way she had learned to think about numbers that represent people. Not abstractly, specifically. Each one of those 7 had been someone's son, someone's father, someone's husband. Someone had gotten a knock at the door and a man in dress uniform and a folded flag and a story that did not include the word Whitmore because nobody knew the word Whitmore yet. She was thinking about this when the first shot came. It came from distance, not the irregular crack of small arms fire from a perimeter engagement. The single specific report of a precision weapon, high caliber, fired from a position far enough away that the sound of the impact arrived before the sound of the shot, which told her the range was significant and the shooter was skilled. The impact was on the east wall of the Tactical Operations Center. She was already moving, not away from it, toward it, which was not calculation. It was the reflex of someone whose training had oriented them toward the center of the problem rather than away from its edges. The second shot came 8 seconds after the first. It hit the gravel between 2 buildings on the base's central corridor, which told her something about the shooter's objective. Not a kill shot, a suppression geometry. The angle of the impacts, first the TOC wall, and then the central corridor, described a field of fire that covered the primary movement routes between the base's eastern and western halves. Someone was cutting the base in half. She processed this in the time it took her to reach cover behind the supply building to her left. The sniper was to the east, elevated. Distance was difficult to calculate from the sound signature alone, given the mountain terrain, which does complicated things to acoustics, but the time between impact and report suggested somewhere between 800 and 1,000 meters. She pressed against the supply building and thought about what she knew. Calloway's people had moved on Whitmore at 1400. The shooting that was currently reorganizing the base's activity made a specific kind of sense as a response to an imminent arrest and no other kind of sense. Whitmore had called something, or someone had called it for him. Her radio crackled. Calloway's voice controlled and immediate. All personnel, take cover and hold position. We have precision fire from the eastern ridgeline grid approximate. Sniper team is cut off at the supply depot. I need someone at the medical building's north face. Elevation. Now. She looked at the medical building. It was 30 meters from her current position. Single story with a reinforced roof that had been constructed with sandbag emplacements at the corners, the standard defensive preparation for any building that might serve as a fighting position during a base attack. The north face of the roof had an unobstructed sight line to the eastern ridgeline. She knew this because she had memorized the base layout on the flight in 3 weeks ago. She ran for the medical building. The roof access was an internal ladder at the building's north end. She took it in 4 movements and came through the hatch into the cold wind and the suddenly enormous sky and the specific clarity that high ground gives you, the way it resolves the geometry of a situation into something you can read. She read it. The eastern ridgeline was a rock formation approximately 900 meters from her position, rising at a 5-degree angle from the valley floor in a series of natural terraces that provided excellent concealment for a shooter using the terrain correctly. She identified 3 possible positions from the topography alone. One was exposed to the afternoon sun and thermally visible. One was accessible from the road that ran north of the ridgeline, which was too easy an approach, and therefore likely a decoy. The third was in a fold of rock at approximately 2/3 the height of the ridgeline, shadow-covered with a natural rest for a bipod and a clear sightline to the central axis of the base. That was the position. She was certain of it in the way that her father had taught her to be certain of things. Not through process of elimination alone, through the synthesis of terrain reading and tactical logic and the specific intuition that develops after enough hours spent thinking about the relationship between a shooter and the ground they choose. She looked at what was on the roof next to the northeast sandbag emplacement. The Barrett M82A1 had been left there by the sniper team when they were cut off by the initial shots trapped in the supply depot to the east. It lay on its bipod, pointing generally toward the ridgeline in the position of a weapon set down in haste by someone who needed both hands for something more immediate. She looked at it. She had not looked at a rifle this way in 15 years. She had handled one briefly in the staging area 3 weeks ago for 4 seconds before she caught herself. She had thought about those 4 seconds in the stone room. The Barrett was a different thing from the M24 in the staging area. The M24 had been incidental, picked up and set down, a moment of muscle memory surfacing through a long absence. The Barrett was a specific question asked in the only language available to it, the language of a situation that had contracted to a point where the question had only one real answer. She thought about her mother. She thought about the understanding that had formed between them in the months after her father's death. The promise that had not needed to be stated as a promise because it was simply what they both knew, what they had both decided about the rifle and what it represented, and the man who had loved it and was gone. She thought about Calloway's radio call. She thought about the 7 soldiers. She thought about Novak on the cot in the medical tent, directly beneath her feet, breathing carefully around a chest wound that was correctly sealed. She walked to the Barrett. She lay down behind it. The bipod was already deployed. The scope was a Night Force quality glass, and she found it with her eye, without adjusting her head position, which meant whoever had set up this position had done it at a height close to her own. She made one adjustment to the length of pull because her arms were proportioned slightly differently, and if she was going to do this, she was going to do it correctly. She looked through the scope at the eastern ridgeline. The fold in the rock was exactly where she had placed it. She assessed the conditions. Wind from the west at approximately 14 knots. She could read it in the movement of a piece of fabric caught on the perimeter wire at the base's eastern edge, the specific angle and frequency of its movement, describing the wind's direction and rough velocity. Temperature was 7 degrees Celsius. Altitude at this location approximately 2,200 meters above sea level, which meant air density was lower than at sea level, which meant the round would travel faster and drop less than sea level ballistics tables would indicate. Her father had spent an entire afternoon on this when she was 10. The way altitude changes everything. The way a shooter who has learned at sea level must recalibrate at elevation, the same principles and different execution. She had thought the difference could not be that significant. He had made her calculate it by hand. She had never argued about it again. 900 meters. Wind 14 knots from the west, pushing the round left and slightly down over its flight path. Altitude compensation requiring an adjustment upward from the sea level drop chart. She worked it in her head with the same methodical discipline she had applied to everything else in the last 9 days. She found the hold point. She breathed. 4 seconds in, 7 hold. She felt her heartbeat, felt the pause between beats. Her father's voice very clear from a ridge in Colorado when she was 9 years old. In the pause. She squeezed. The Barrett fired with a sound and a recoil that exist on a different scale from other rifles. The .50 caliber round is not a subtle thing. It is 30 pounds of precision machinery channeling an enormous amount of force in a specific direction, and the rifle communicates this to the shooter through every point of contact. She had fired a .50 caliber twice in her life, both times at a range when she was 10, and her father had decided she was ready for it. She had not enjoyed it. She had understood it, which was what mattered. She stayed on the scope. The round had gone left. She saw the impact on the rock face left of the fold by approximately 5 inches. She had been slightly conservative on the wind compensation. She adjusted. She worked the bolt. She breathed. Calloway's voice on the radio distant, "I need eyes on that ridgeline. Someone give me a position." The second shot was not a thought. It was the completion of a calculation that had been running from the moment she lay down behind the rifle. Every adjustment made, every variable accounted for, the whole point placed with the precision of someone who had been doing this in some form since she was 9 years old, and whose hands, whatever the intervening years had decided about them, had not forgotten what they knew. She squeezed in the pause. The sound from the ridgeline was not a secondary shot. It was not a repositioning. It was the specific sound of something going still. She stayed on the scope for 4 seconds. The position in the fold was empty. She exhaled. She lay there for a moment behind the rifle, not yet moving, and thought about what had just happened in the specific way her father had taught her to think about things that carry weight. Not quickly and not in the language of triumph, because that was never the language available to people who had been taught correctly about what this was and what it was not. He had said once that the moment after is the moment that tells you who you are, not the moment before when the decision is still open, not during when the body is doing what it has been trained to do. After, in the silence that follows, she lay behind the rifle in the cold wind and listened to the silence. Then Calloway's radio crackled, "Ridgeline clear, stand by." She got up. She stood for a moment on the roof of the medical building, with the wind off the northern mountains moving through her clothing and the enormous sky of the Hindu Kush above her, and the base below her beginning to shift from the held stillness of a perimeter response back toward the sounds of a base that has been through something and is assessing the damage. She heard Chambers before she saw him. He had come up the ladder while she was still behind the rifle, and he was standing near the hatch with his hands in his pockets and his face in the expression she had begun to be able to read. Settled. Attending. He had seen the second shot. He had been on the roof for it. She walked toward the hatch, and he did not move out of the way immediately, not blocking her, simply present. Calloway's people have Whitmore, he said. Building 4 East Corridor. He triggered the sniper when the cuffs went on. She nodded. He's wounded, Chambers said. Whitmore. Caught a round in the exchange when one of Calloway's people returned fire. She processed this. How bad? Abdominal. Not immediately fatal, but he needs attention. The base's current surgical capacity is not best suited for. She looked at him. You're telling me this because... Chambers met her eyes. Because you're the most capable medical person on this base right now. And because the man who is wounded is the man responsible for 7 soldiers who are not here anymore. And because I have been around long enough to know that a person should make that decision themselves rather than have it made for them. She thought about it. Not for long. Take me to him, she said. Building 4's East Corridor was narrow and smelled like concrete, and the specific sharp iron smell of recent blood. 2 of Calloway's people were positioned at the entrance. They looked at her and looked at Chambers and moved aside without comment. Whitmore was on the floor. He was a man in his mid-40s, medium height, with the kind of build that had once been athletic and had settled into something softer without entirely losing the underlying structure. He was holding his own abdomen with both hands in the automatic way of someone whose body understands the situation even when the mind is still catching up. His face was pale in the specific way of a person losing blood at a managed but serious rate. He looked up when she walked in. She did not look at his face. She looked at his abdomen. She crouched beside him and moved his hands with the calm efficiency of someone who is not interested in the context of a wound, only in its mechanics. He did not resist. She examined the entry wound, through and through which was better. The trajectory was lateral, which meant it had not gone through the primary vascular structure at the midline. The bleeding was serious but controllable, the kind of controllable that requires correct intervention within a specific window. She opened her kit. Her hands moved. She had thought in the abstract about how she would feel doing this. She had not been able to predict it with confidence because the abstract version of a thing is always imprecise, and the reality always arrives with details the abstract could not have anticipated. The reality of it was this: her hands did not care who he was. That was what her training had given her, and her father's teaching had given her before the training, the specific discipline of a person who has decided that the person in front of them is a medical problem before they are anything else, and that the medical problem is the only thing she has jurisdiction over right now. She worked. She controlled the bleeding. She packed the wound with the correct material in the correct sequence. She assessed his vital signs with the touch and observation of someone who does not need instruments to tell her the primary things. She gave him what she had that would help and noted what he needed that she could not provide here. He needed surgery. He needed it within the next several hours. He was stable for that window if she had done this correctly. She had done it correctly. She sat back on her heels. He was looking at her. His color was already slightly better. He was conscious and oriented, which the blood loss had been threatening. "You're Harmon," he said. "Yes." He looked at her for a moment with an expression that she did not try to categorize. It was too complicated, and she was not sure she was the right person to receive it. "I'm sorry," he said. She looked at her hands. She peeled the gloves off and placed them in the disposal bag from her kit. "The surgery you need is at Bagram," she said. "They'll transport you within the hour. Keep your hands away from the dressing." She stood. She picked on her kit. Briggs was at the corridor entrance. He had arrived while she was working, and he was looking at her in a way she registered first as unfamiliar, before she identified what it was. She had not seen that expression on Briggs's face before. In 3 weeks and 9 days, in the full arc of everything that had happened between then and now, she had seen Briggs skeptical and dismissive, and quietly recalculating, and briefly struck on the aircraft into something that might eventually become respect. This was different from all of those. He was looking at her the way that people sometimes look at things that have rearranged their understanding of the world, and the rearrangement is recent enough that you can still see the process happening. He said nothing. She walked toward the corridor entrance. As she passed him, he stepped aside in the way people make room for things they have recognized. She walked past him into the corridor. Behind her, she heard Briggs say quietly to no one specific, "Same hands." She kept walking. Calloway found her at the water point at the base's western edge, where she had gone because she needed a moment that was not inside a building or on a roof or in a corridor. The western edge of the base had the clearest view of the mountains in the direction where the light was best in the late afternoon. He stood next to her. They looked at the mountains. He said, "Whitmore is talking." She had expected this. "The insider contact started 18 months ago," Calloway said. "The approach came through a financial channel, his wife's medical bills, the kind of debt that changes a person's calculation." She said nothing. "He says he never thought it would get people killed. He thought it was location data, routes, that they'd avoid contact." Her left side registered its familiar objection with every inhale. She let it. "Routes are what makes contact happen," she said. "I know. He didn't know that." Calloway was quiet. "Or he chose not to know it," she said, "which is a different thing but arrives at the same place." Calloway nodded once. "The 8-day timeline," she said. "The rotation starting in 8 days." "We've looked at it," Calloway said. "The patrol scheduled for that rotation." He paused. "Your team was on it. Full recon team 4. She absorbed this. The capture had not been opportunistic. The ambush had not been primarily about interdicting a routine recon mission. It had been about removing the medical support from a team before a larger operation planned for 8 days out. Remove the medic, reduce the team's survivability in a sustained engagement, then conduct the larger ambush against a degraded force. She had been the first move in a sequence. "The patrol has been canceled," Calloway said. "And the sequence is broken," she said, "because you didn't talk." She looked at the mountains. She thought about 9 days in a stone room, in a chair with marks on its inner surface, in a piece of metal smaller than a thumbnail, in the specific discipline of a person who has decided that the feeling is not the point. "My father used to say that the most important thing you do is sometimes the thing nobody sees," she said. Calloway looked at her. "He was right," he said. They stood for a moment longer in the late afternoon light that was doing complicated things to the surface of the mountains, finding angles and colors that the midday sun is too direct to reveal. "Colonel Rains wants to see you," Calloway said. When you're ready." 30 minutes, she said. He nodded and left. She stayed at the western edge for the 30 minutes she had given herself and used them the way she had learned to use the resource of stillness, not passively, as a form of work. She organized what had happened. She filed it in the correct sequence. She identified what she understood and what she did not yet understand and what she could not from her current position know. She thought about her father. She thought about what he had given her and what it had cost and what it had been worth. She thought those were 3 separate questions and that she was not finished with any of them. She walked toward the command building. Colonel Rains was a man in his mid-50s who had the quality of someone who had decided very early in his career what he was and had spent the intervening decades becoming more precisely that. He was behind a desk notable for the absence of things that did not belong there. He stood when she came in, which she had not expected. He gestured to the chair across from him. She sat. He sat. He looked at her in the way of someone making a genuine assessment rather than a courtesy one. "The information you collected during your captivity," he said, "has given us the clearest picture we have had of the logistics and personnel structure of the network that has been operating in this corridor for the past 14 months. The compound layout you provided has been cross-referenced with satellite imagery, and it is accurate to a degree that our external collection was not able to achieve." He paused. "The insider information cross-referenced with Whitmore's statement identifies a contact chain that extends beyond this installation. We are in the process of mapping it." She waited. "The sniper engagement this afternoon," he said. She said nothing. 900 meters, 14-knot crosswind, altitude correction, single miss adjusted into a confirmed neutralization. He let that sit for a moment. "Our sniper team, which was unavailable, would have made that shot. You made it too. Under conditions that included 9 days of captivity and 3 cracked ribs." She looked at a point on the desk. "My father taught me," she said. "Gunnery Sergeant Dale Harmon," Rains said. "Marine Scout Sniper, Kunar Province, 2009. "Yes, sir." Rains was quiet for a moment. "I knew of him," he said. "Not personally, by reputation. His reputation was of a particular kind. The kind where people who know what they are looking at understand immediately what they are looking at." She said nothing. "What you have done here," Rains said, "across the full scope of it, the captivity, the collection, the medical work on the aircraft and in Building 4, The sniper engagement is the kind of performance that does not fit cleanly into the existing categories we use to describe things. It requires a different category. He looked at her steadily. I am not a man who says things I do not mean. So when I tell you that I have not seen anything like this in anyone, you should understand that I mean it precisely. She thought about her father's voice, about what he had said in the particular quiet of a Colorado ridge about doing things without an audience. My father told me, she said, that the right thing and the visible thing are usually separate, that the work matters. The recognition of the work is secondary. Rains looked at her for a moment. He raised you correctly, he said. Then something crossed his face that was not official. It was the expression of a man who is also simply a person, and the person has something to say that the official is not going to stop him from saying. He would be proud, he said. That is not a military assessment. That is just true. She held that. Ihazayama. She held it the way you hold things that are too large for the moment you are currently in with the intention of returning to them when the moment is different. Thank you, sir, she said. She stood. She walked out of the command building into an evening that had turned cold and clear, the stars beginning to appear at the edges of the darkening sky, the mountains becoming the familiar darkness against the lesser darkness she had grown used to over the weeks at Salerno. Chambers was outside. He was leaning against the building's exterior wall in the manner of a man who has been waiting without wanting to appear to be waiting. He straightened when she came out. Walk, he said. She walked. They went toward the western edge because it had the mountains and the fading light and the particular quality of a place that is not inside anything, and she needed that right now. They walked for a moment without speaking. Then Chambers said, I need to tell you something. I have been waiting for the right moment, and I am not sure this is it, but I have decided it does not matter. She looked at him. I was in Kunar in 2009, he said. She had known this was coming. She had known it from the moment on the aircraft when she had registered something particular in how he had received her name. Not recognition as a stranger receives a name. Recognition as a person receives something they have been carrying. I know, she said. He looked at her. I figured it out in the stone room, she said. I had time to think about things I hadn't had time to think about. The way you said, I know, when I told you who my father was. It wasn't information. It was confirmation. He was quiet for a moment. I found your name 6 months ago, he said, in a personnel rotation request. Attached medic slot Recon Team 4 at Salerno. I read it twice to make certain. He stopped walking. I made one request through the chain that my team be on the rescue rotation for Salerno's attached personnel. She stopped. You came for me specifically, she said. I came because I made a promise, he said. Not in so many words, but I made it. She looked at the mountains. He talked about you, Chambers said. One night when the tempo eased and we had a few hours that were not moving at full speed. He mentioned that he had a daughter, that he had been teaching her since she was small. He said she had something he did not know how to name exactly. He said she could be still longer than anyone he had ever seen. She listened. He said she was going to figure out what to do with it. He didn't know what that would be. He said it like he meant it as a good thing, like the not knowing was part of what he liked about it. Chambers paused. Then he asked me something. Before August 14th, 2009, the morning of. He asked me if something happens to me, will she be all right? She breathed carefully. I said yes, Chambers said. I said yes, sir, she will be all right. I didn't know how I was going to keep that. I had never met you. I had heard about you for one night on a hillside, but I said it because he asked it and because I believed it. She held very still. I believed it before I had evidence, he said. And now I have more evidence than I know what to do with. She looked at him in the evening light, this man who had been on a hillside with her father and had carried something back from that hillside for 16 years and had been true to it in the specific way that people are true to things they have decided are worth being true to. He would have been angry with me, she said, about the rifle. Yes, Chambers said, and then proud. In that order, he said, I think you knew that before you lay down behind it. She thought about the moment on the roof, the question the Barrett had been asking. The calculation she had run not just about wind and distance, but about everything that led to that moment. He didn't teach you to be safe, Chambers said. He taught you to be useful. She held that. The wind off the mountains moved through the base, and the stars were fully committed. Now the sky, having made its decision about the evening and the darkness, had the clarity that comes only at altitude on a cold night when there is nothing between you and the rest of the universe. Thank you, she said, For saying yes in 2009. Chambers nodded once. They stood for a moment longer. Then the bass's sounds reclaimed them. Sounds of a place that had been through something and was not finished processing it, and they walked back toward those sounds, because the next necessary thing was also their business. She found Calloway before she went to sleep. He was in the Tactical Operations Center doing what Calloway did at the end of a day that had been full of what this day had been full of, which was the paperwork of aftermath. After action, casualty reports, communication with higher. The administrative weight of events that have to be recorded because recording is how the institution learns or is supposed to learn from what has happened. She sat across from him. The patrol, she said, the one that was planned, Recon Team 4 in 8 days. Yes. Whitmore was going to sell those coordinates. My team was going to walk into it. Yes. That's why they took me specifically. Not for information about the general mission. To remove the medical support before the ambush. An injured team without a medic there doesn't have the same options. Calloway looked at her steadily. We worked that out from Whitmore's statement, he said. About 2 hours ago. She was quiet. You went into the stone room, and he said, as the first move in a plan to destroy your team. You came out having destroyed the plan instead. She looked at her hands. I came out having done the job, she said. That's all. Calloway was quiet for a long moment. Not the quiet of a man searching for words. The quiet of a man who has found the right words and is deciding whether to say them. Your father, he said. I read his service record after we pulled your file before the exfil. 22 years, 3 theaters, awards he would have had to be talked into accepting. He paused. The kind of service that doesn't make the news because the people who do it prefer it that way. She said nothing. You're going to be fine, he said. It was not a compliment. It was an assessment delivered with the flat confidence of a man who has been evaluating people for a long time. Whatever comes next. She stood. Get some rest, Calloway, she said. She walked out and found her billet and lay down and stared at the canvas ceiling for a long time. She thought about her father. She thought about the specific weight of 15 years without a rifle, which was also 15 years of honoring something she had decided at 11 years old because grief had needed a shape, and that was the shape it took. She thought about whether the weight had been worth carrying and decided that was the wrong question. The weight had been the right weight for the right years, and now something had shifted, and the weight was different, and she would have to decide what to do with the difference. She thought about Chambers saying the gift is what you become. She thought about 16 students in a classroom somewhere in a future she had not yet arrived at. She thought about her father's hands on her 9-year-old shoulders adjusting the stock position without impatience, without commentary, with the attention of someone who considers small adjustments worth making correctly. She thought about all of this until the exhaustion that had been waiting patiently for her to be done took her and she was gone. Epilogue, 6 months later. Fort Bragg looked like North Carolina in the spring, which is a particular and specific beauty that belongs to flatland after altitude. The way the sky widens when the mountains are not there to narrow it, and everything takes on a kind of horizontal generosity that mountain landscapes do not permit. The classroom was in a building that smelled like floor wax and coffee and the particular institutional neutrality of a space designed for learning. 16 chairs arranged in the semicircle that works best for the kind of instruction that requires the instructor to see all the faces and all the faces to see each other. Sloane stood at the front of the room. She had put on 7 pounds since Salerno, not a number she tracked precisely, but one the doctor had mentioned with satisfaction at her last evaluation, and she had noted it as relevant information the way she noted all relevant information. The shadows under her eyes that had been there for the better part of 2 years had mostly resolved. The ribs had healed cleanly. The right eye was fully functional. She was by every measure the military applied fit for duty and then some. She looked at the 16 people in the semicircle. They were a mix. Some were corpsmen, some were Special Forces medics with 18D designations. 2 were from the medical officer track, younger than the others, coming to this from a direction that gave them theoretical depth and a practical gap the course was designed to address. Tate was in the 3rd chair from the left. His shoulder was fully restored, and his expression carried the specific quality of someone who has decided that the person at the front of the room has something worth having and he intends to pay attention. He had requested a transfer to the course as a student. The chain of command had approved it without difficulty. Novak was in the 4th chair from the right. He had requested observer status, which had also been approved. His chest had healed cleanly. He walked with the slightly deliberate quality of someone who has been reminded recently that walking is a thing to be grateful for, and he sat in the classroom with the attention of a man who intends not to need what she is teaching and intends equally to know it anyway. She had not expected him to come. She was glad he had. Behind her on the board in her handwriting, heal when you can, fight when you must. She had not put it there for effect. She had put it there because it was the organizing principle of what the next 6 weeks would cover, and organizing principles deserve to be visible. The curriculum had taken 4 months to develop. She had worked on it with Chambers, who had a way of asking questions about methodology that improved everything she was thinking, without replacing it, and with a training coordinator at SOCOM who had told her in their first meeting that the concept of fully integrated combat medicine had been discussed for years and had lacked a practitioner who had both the operational experience and the pedagogical clarity to structure it as a course. She had not described her operational experience at that meeting in any detail. The coordinator had apparently read the file. The ripple effects had begun before the course was even finalized. The VA had contacted SOCOM 3 weeks after the curriculum was submitted, requesting to review the framework for potential adaptation into training programs across 3 states. A phrase had begun appearing in after-action reports from units in the region that had been briefed on the course's development. 4 words that a sergeant had apparently said in a debrief and that had since taken on a life of their own. Drag them out alive. She had not invented that phrase. She had never said it. It had emerged from the idea, which was a different thing, and the idea had emerged from 9 days in a stone room, which was a different thing still. She thought about how things travel the long distance between origin and arrival, and how the origin is usually invisible by the time the thing itself becomes visible. She stood at the front of the room and looked at 16 people who were going to leave in 6 weeks able to do something they could not do when they arrived. "My name is Harmon," she said. "For the next 6 weeks, I am going to teach you how to keep someone alive while people are trying to kill you, and how to address the people trying to kill you without stopping keeping someone alive. These are not separate skills with a transition point between them. They are a single integrated function. By the time we are done, your hands will understand that." She paused. "Questions before we start?" One of the medical officers raised a hand. He was 26, which she noticed because it was her age, and he had the expression of someone who had done well in school and was accustomed to the world confirming this. "Can you tell us about your operational background?" he said. She looked at him. "No," she said, "but in 6 weeks you will understand what it produced. That is more useful." He lowered his hand. Tate in the third chair did not raise his hand. He was watching her with the full allocation of his attention in a way that she recognized. He had started watching her this way somewhere around the 7th day at Salerno, the day she had caught his infection, before it became something that would have put him on the ground in a hostile valley 8 hours from medical support. She began. That evening, she called home. The phone rang 3 times, which was normal because her mother moved through the house at a pace that was her own and had always been her own and was not altered by the urgency of anyone waiting on the other end of a telephone. "Sloan," her mother said. "Hi, Mom." The sound of the kitchen in Colorado came through the line, the specific acoustic quality of that room, the window above the sink that looked out toward the foothills. She had grown up in that kitchen. She had been told things in that kitchen and had understood things in that kitchen and had made in a conversation that was not quite a conversation, the decision about the rifle when she was 11 years old. "How are you feeling?" her mother said. "Good," Sloan said. "Better." "You sound better." She was standing at the window of the housing unit at Bragg looking out at the North Carolina evening, which was mild and wide and nothing like Afghanistan and nothing like Colorado and entirely its own thing. "I need to tell you something," she said. Her mother waited. "I picked up a rifle," she said. "In Afghanistan, in the field, I used it." The silence on the line had a specific texture. Not absence, the presence of someone who is listening carefully and thinking carefully before they speak. "Were you hurt?" her mother said. "Cracked ribs, some other things, all healed. And the people you were with, alive," she said, "because of the rifle partly." Another silence. "Your father," her mother said, "had a thing he used to say. Do you remember about the gift?" Sloan thought about it. She thought about the specific weight of a rifle in her hands at 9 years old, the stock too long for her shoulder, and her father adjusting the position without comment, without impatience, with the particular attention of someone who considers small adjustments worth making correctly. "The gift is not the rifle," she said slowly. "The gift is what you become through the work of learning it." "Yes," her mother said. He said the rifle is just the instrument. Yes, Sloan breathed. He meant, her mother said, that the gift was always yours. He wasn't giving you the rifle. He was giving you what you learned about yourself while you were learning to use it. The patience, the stillness, the discipline of a person who can hold a position longer than the conditions require because they have decided the work matters more than the discomfort. She stood at the window. She thought about 9 days in a stone room, about a map built from sound and pattern and the discipline of attention, about a chair with marks on its inner surface, about a roof in a cold wind and a fold in a ridgeline 900 meters away, about a man who had asked if his daughter would be all right and another man who had said yes and meant it. He would be angry with me, she said, for the risk. Yeah, her mother said, and then proud. Yeah, her mother said, in that order, the way he always was. They were quiet for a moment. I'm teaching now, Sloan said, a course at Bragg, integrated medicine. I have 16 students. Her mother made a sound that was not a word. It was the sound of someone receiving news they had been waiting for without knowing they were waiting for it. He would have loved that, her mother said. The teaching. He always said the best thing you can do with what you know is give it to someone who needs it. He said that to me on the ridge, Sloan said, about his own father. I was 10. I didn't understand what he meant. And now she looked at the North Carolina evening. She thought about Tate in the third chair, watching with the full allocation of his attention. She thought about Novak in the fourth chair, from the right present, by choice learning what he never wants to need. She thought about 14 other people who would carry something out of that classroom in 6 weeks that they did not have when they walked in. Now I understand, she said. They talked for a while longer the way that people talk when the conversation that needed to happen has happened, and what remains is simply the pleasure of the voice on the other end and the knowledge that it is there. Her mother asked practical questions, and she answered them, and she asked practical questions in return, and eventually the natural end of the conversation arrived. I love you, Mom. I love you, Sloan. A pause. Your father loved you. That doesn't need saying, but I'm saying it. I know, she said. She set the phone down. She turned from the window. On the desk in the corner of the room among the course materials and the medical references and the operational notes she had been compiling was a photograph. Chambers had given it to her at Bagram in the hour before she boarded the transport home, sliding it across the table between them without explanation. She picked it up now. 2 men in the photograph, both in uniform, both in the specific posture of people who have been in the field long enough that standing up straight for a photograph requires conscious effort. The mountains behind them were the profile of a ridgeline in Kannar province. She knew the shape of those mountains now. Her father was on the left. Chambers was on the right, both younger. Her father perhaps 35, which would have been an earlier deployment before 2009. Chambers maybe early 30s. Squinting against the light she recognized as the specific quality of high-altitude morning sun. She turned the photograph over. The handwriting on the back was her father's. She had not read it clearly at Bagram because there had been too much happening and because she had not been ready. She had put it away and carried it and set it on the desk and looked at it sometimes without reading it. She read it now. Take care of her when I can't. She's going to do things I never imagined. Make sure she knows it's allowed. And then below that in the compressed script of someone running out of room Dale, Kunar 2009. She held the photograph. She held it until the specific weight of it had distributed itself through her, not becoming lighter, becoming integrated the way things become integrated when you have held them long enough to stop resisting the weight and simply carry it. She set it back on the desk. She looked at it for a moment. Then she sat down and opened the curriculum notes for the next day's session because there was work to do and 16 people in 16 chairs who were going to need what she had to give them. And her father had always said the work mattered more than the moment after it. She worked until late. In the morning, she came in before any of her students and wrote on the board beneath the line that was already there. Beneath heal when you can, fight when you must, she wrote, the gift is not the instrument. The gift is what you become. And below that, smaller in the handwriting she had inherited from a man on a ridge above a valley in Colorado DH. She stood back and looked at it. Then the door opened, and Tate was the first one, in which did not surprise her because Tate had been early every day of the first week, and she had noted it as a form of communication she understood and respected. He looked at what she had written on the board. He looked at the initials. He did not ask about them. He found his chair and sat down and oriented himself toward the front of the room and waited. Novak came in second. He moved to his chair with the deliberate quality of a man who is grateful for movement and has decided to be deliberate about it. He looked at the board. He looked at her. He nodded once the way people nod when they have understood something that did not require words. More students arrived. The room filled. At 800 hours, she looked at 16 people who were ready to learn something that mattered in a room that smelled like floor wax and coffee and the mild North Carolina morning coming through the windows. She thought about a stone room with no windows. She thought about what had been built in that room in the dark with bound hands and a piece of metal smaller than a thumbnail, in the specific discipline of a person who has decided that the feeling is not the point. She thought about what her father had given her and what she was now giving forward, the long chain of it, each link made from work and patience, and the decision of someone who has been taught that you can't hear anything if you're talking, so you listen first and you listen well and you act from what you hear rather than from what you wish were true. She looked at her students. She thought about a quiet man on a ridge who had adjusted the stock position without impatience and given her 2 years of mornings and a set of tools she had spent 15 years deciding she did not need and 9 days discovering she had never set down. She thought about what it means to carry something that long and still have it intact when you open your hands. She thought about what it means to give it to someone who needs it. She looked at Tate and Novak and 14 others who had come to this room because they had decided that knowing how to use both hands was worth the work of learning. She looked at the board. The gift is what you become. Let's start, she said. Her hands were steady. They had been steady for a very long time. That was the gift. It had always been the gift. She understood that now in a way she had not understood it when it was given, which is how the best gifts work. They travel forward in time. They arrive at their full meaning only when the person carrying them has lived enough to receive them properly. Dale Harmon had known his daughter would live enough. He had said so in the specific way that a man says things he cannot verify but knows to be true on a hillside in Kunar in August of 2009 to a man who had promised to remember it. The man had remembered. The daughter had lived. And now in a classroom at Fort Bragg on a spring morning with the North Carolina sky wide and generous outside the windows, 16 people leaned slightly forward in their chairs and listened. Because she was talking now. And when Sloan Harmon talked, it was worth listening to.